One Scottish house went up for auction at well under €19,000. It sits inside a country where the average home costs over £200,000, and more than 43,000 houses stand empty right now. That gap between the headline price and the real market is exactly where a Scotland move goes wrong. This list counts down the real islands and Highland towns where prices are genuinely low, the empty home numbers behind them, and the one honest catch attached to each place. By the end, you will know what a listing like that actually buys and who is willing to buy it. Welcome back to Wonderful Britain, where we skip the postcard shots and get straight to the real numbers. Subscribe if you're tired of property videos where every town looks perfect on camera and nobody mentions the leaking roof, the ferry timetable, or the nearest hospital. Here we show Britain the way it actually is, catches included. Let's get into it. Scotland isn't a cheap country to buy in, not as a whole. The UK House Price Index put the average Scottish home at around £192,000 in the middle of 2024, the measure the government itself relies on. Registers of Scotland, working straight from sale prices instead of an adjusted average, puts the number closer to £221,000. 23 of Scotland's 32 council areas saw prices climb that year, not fall. That's what makes the empty homes number worth pulling apart. Scotland's own council tax records, counted in September 2024, found 43,538 homes empty for more than 6 months. Almost 3/4 of those, 31,596 houses, had sat empty for over a year. On top of that sit 21,606 second homes, mostly unused for much of the year. That count actually dropped 10% in 12 months, the sharpest drop in a decade, right after the government added a full council tax premium on second homes in April 2024. Scotland does have a real glut of empty houses. It just doesn't spread evenly across the map. It piles up in specific islands and Highland council areas, and that's exactly where this list is headed. The Scottish Government already knows this, and it's not staying quiet about it. Its own population strategy names a more balanced population as an explicit goal, and the National Islands Plan lists depopulation as the single biggest issue islanders raised when they were asked. The government's revised national planning framework even lists growing the population of rural areas as one of its formal outcomes, right alongside housing targets and infrastructure spending. That's the backdrop for every price tag coming up in this list. These aren't just cheap houses sitting in pretty places by accident. They're the visible evidence of a demographic problem the government is actively trying to reverse, one grant and one tax rule at a time. Number 7 on this list is Shetland. If you pictured the emptiest, cheapest edge of Britain, you probably pictured Shetland first. And the real number tells a different story. Local house prices data from July 2024 put the average Shetland property at around £210,699. That's up 18.1% over the year before, even though prices had dipped 1.4% in the month itself. Rightmove's sold price data lands close by at roughly £203,541, which sits 6% above Shetland's own 2022 peak. This isn't a market in freefall. It's a market climbing on an island most people assume is stuck in reverse. Break the number down by house type and the picture softens a little. Flats on Shetland average around £136,524. Terraced houses average £144,598, and that terraced figure alone climbed 18.4% in a single year. Detached homes stay firmly out of bargain territory, averaging £263,000. Here's the honest catch on Shetland. Whatever you pictured when you heard remote Scottish island, demand there's clearly strong enough to keep pushing prices up year after year, not down. Being far from everything doesn't automatically mean a falling market. Sometimes it means the opposite, because enough people want to live there and are prepared to pay for it. Picture what that average number actually buys. £210,000 is still less than half of what the same style of terraced house would cost you an hour outside London. It comes with a working harbour town, Lerwick, attached to, not a village green with a single pub. That's the real trade on Shetland. You don't get a rock bottom price, you get a serious discount on mainland Britain. Wrapped around a proper town with a hospital, a ferry terminal, and an economy that doesn't depend on tourists showing up every July. Shetland proves this video's premise is more complicated than it looks. If the truly cheap corner of the map isn't here, the next island down the list gets us closer. Number 6 on this list is Orkney. Orkney has hundreds of empty houses sitting on it right now, and it still isn't cheap by headline standards. The average Orkney property ran to £215,079 in the middle of 2024, up 6.4% over the year. That figure was down 3.2% though, when you compare the last 4 quarters to the 4 before that. At the same time, the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership counted 252 long-term empty homes on Orkney, 201 of which had sat empty for a full year or more. Put those two facts side by side and you get the real lesson of this entry. An empty house doesn't mean a falling market. Usually it means an owner, often a second homeowner or an estate working through probate, is simply sitting on the property while values around it keep climbing. The house stays empty, the market stays healthy, and those two things happen together, constantly, which breaks the simple version of the empty equals cheap story this whole video started with. Orkney also complicates a comforting assumption people bring to island life, that isolation automatically drags prices down, because it doesn't play out that way here. Ferries, ferry-linked supply chains, and a smaller pool of retirees and remote workers competing for the same handful of houses can push prices up just as easily as they push people away. The pattern from Shetland repeats here. Empty homes and rising prices sit in the same postcode, and the island that actually delivers a bargain is still ahead. There's a wider lesson buried in Orkney's numbers too. Across Scotland as a whole, the rate of long-term empty homes runs to about 116 for every 10,000 dwellings, and the rate of second homes sits at around 79 per 10,000. Orkney's own empty home count looks small written as a single number, 252 houses, but measured against how few people actually live there, it's a heavier weight than almost anywhere else on the mainland carries. Small islands feel these numbers in a way a city the size of Glasgow never would. Government analysts themselves warn against reading too much into any single quarter here. Small island markets can swing hard on a handful of sales, so a 3% drop one quarter and a 6% rise, the next don't cancel out, they just show how thin the trading really is. That's worth remembering every time a headline treats one island's monthly wobble as a trend. Number 5 on this list is Naich Ailianan Sia, the Western Isles, and this is the cheapest average housing market anywhere in Scotland. It's also where this list's honest catch hits the hardest. The average home here runs to £144,259, well under the national average of around £200,000, and the lowest figure of any Scottish council area in this research. 688 homes here count as long-term empty, 581 of them empty for a full year or more. That's just over 2% of every long-term empty home in Scotland, sitting in a council area that holds barely 0.5% of the country's total housing. The Western Isles genuinely deliver what the title promised here. Real houses, real bargains, well below what you'd pay almost anywhere else in Britain. £144,000 is close to what a lot of pensioners in the south of England are still putting down as a deposit alone, not the full price of the house behind it. Here, that same figure clears the mortgage entirely. Now here comes the catch, because every place on this list gets exactly one. Fuel poverty here runs higher than anywhere else in Scotland. Depending on which survey you check, somewhere between 40 and 56% of households in the Western Isles count as fuel poor, the worst rate of any council area in the country. Part of the reason is infrastructure. Only around 55% of rural Scottish homes sit within reach of the mains gas grid, against 97% in towns and cities, which forces a lot of island homes onto pricier electric or off-grid heating. Hold on to that fuel poverty number, because the Western Isles aren't even the worst example of it on this list. The next entry gets worse before this video gets to the good news. That's the trade sitting underneath every cheap Western Isles listing. You buy the house for a fraction of the mainland price, then you heat it for a lot more than the mainland price, and nobody puts that second half in the listing photos. The government has at least tried to answer this. An early proposal called the Islands Bond floated a £5 million fund, offering up to £50,000 each to as many as 100 households by 2026. The goal was to help people stay on the islands or persuade new arrivals to move there in the first place. It's a small program next to the scale of the problem, but it tells you the state itself sees the Western Isles as a place worth actively fighting to keep populated, not just a scenic backdrop for a property listing. Number 4 on this list is Highland, and it holds more long-term empty homes than any other council area in Scotland, close to 1 in 8 of the entire country's total. It's also the region researchers say hits residents hardest at almost every stage of life. Highland alone accounts for 3,390 long-term empty homes, 3,334 of which have sat empty for a full year or more. That works out to 11.79% of every long-term empty home in Scotland sitting inside one council area. This is the open loop from the last entry paying off. If the Western Isles fuel poverty numbers worried you, the cost of actually living in the Highlands is where that worry gets confirmed with hard figures. Highland's own fuel poverty rate sits close behind the Western Isles too, somewhere between a third and nearly half of all households, depending on which survey you check, roughly in the same range as Argyll and Bute. Researchers call the wider cost problem the Highland premium, and it shows up at nearly every stage of life, from childcare to heating to healthcare to end-of-life care. The overall cost of living in remote parts of Scotland runs up to 30% higher than the national average, while incomes in those same areas sit around 10% lower. Households pay roughly £1,000 more a year on energy than the Scottish average. Parcel deliveries cost about 75% more in remote rural Scotland, and almost double that on the islands. The household budget needed for a basic, acceptable standard of living in remote rural Scotland runs 10 to 40% higher than the rest of the UK. Put plainly, for a pensioner on a fixed income, that gap isn't small change. A cheaper house can still add up to a more expensive life. Heating a home that isn't on the gas grid costs more, the same weekly shop costs more, and a parcel delivery charge here would embarrass a courier anywhere else in Britain. The Scottish Government's response so far is an addressing depopulation fund, backed by £180,000 split between 3 local authorities across 2024 and 2026. That comes with joint funding for community settlement officers who work directly with local areas on the ground. Highlands and Islands Enterprise runs its own community-level programs on top of that, focused specifically on keeping settlements viable rather than just pretty. Back in 2022 and 2023 alone, government funding for rural communities ran to £11.6 million, with a further £9.6 million ring-fenced the following year for local action groups. That's real money, but measured against a region this size and a premium this steep, it reads more like a sandbag against a rising tide than a fix. Right, before the next one, tell me in the comments which one of these places you'd actually pack a van for. If you've made it this far, consider hitting like and subscribe, because this channel goes looking for the towns everyone else drives past. Let's get back to the list. Scotland isn't the only country wrestling with empty houses and vanishing communities, and looking at how another country handled it tells you exactly what's coming for entry number 1. Number 3 on this list is Italy's €1 houses, and they're a warning, not a blueprint. Scotland hasn't tried anything this drastic yet. Italy already ran the experiment, and the results explain exactly why a cheap sale price never fixes an empty town on its own. The scheme started in Salemi, Sicily, back in 2008, and spread to dozens of small Italian municipalities from there. Researchers identified 4,295 Italian towns suffering what one report called housing discomfort, measured against demographic, social, economic, and basic service thresholds. Of those, 1,650 were judged at genuine risk of becoming full ghost towns. The pitch sounds simple. Buy a derelict house for €1, the price of a coffee, and the town gets a resident back. The fine print tells the real story. Buyers typically have to submit a renovation plan within a year, start work within 2 months of getting permits, and hand over a refundable deposit of around €5,000. Once you add structural repairs, seismic upgrades, and getting basic utilities connected, most of these €1 projects end up costing 20 to 30,000 euros or more, sometimes a lot more. Close to 40% of them stall out or get abandoned before the work is even finished. That's the mechanism this whole video keeps circling back to. The sale price was never the real cost, and it never is. Whether it's a Sicilian farmhouse advertised for €1, or a Scottish croft house advertised for a fraction of its mainland equivalent, the number on the listing is the smallest part of the bill. And it's the part every headline leads with anyway. Scotland hasn't launched a formal £1 scheme of its own. It doesn't need to. The same arithmetic is already sitting inside every one of its cheapest listings. Think about what a 40% failure rate actually means for the families involved. Out of every 10 families who bought into the €1 dream, 4 walked away before the renovation was even finished, deposit gone, house still standing empty, town no closer to being saved. Scotland's empty homes haven't been marketed anywhere near that aggressively, and they still sit there year after year for the same underlying reason. A low price gets someone interested. It's never enough on its own to get someone to actually stay. Number 2 on this list is the Isle of Bute, and it sits inside a council area that's already been dropping in price. Argyll and Bute recorded one of the steepest four-quarter price falls of any Scottish local authority, down 2.4%, while national prices kept climbing. That's the backdrop worth knowing before this entry, because it's the one place on this whole list where the bargain is real. It's not a rounding error and not a derelict shell waiting for a full rebuild, just a genuinely cheap flat in a working island town. Over the last year, the average Bute property sold for £135,534. Flats make up most of what actually sells on the island, and they average just £96,689. Detached houses run a lot higher at £273,236, and terraced homes sit in between at £181,562. Prices climbed 17% over the year, though they're still 8% below Bute's 2022 peak of £146,971. Bute backs up the real thesis of this entire video. Cheap and livable can exist in the same place without a derelict roof or a renovation grant attached. It took a properly serviced, ferry-connected town, Rothesay, with a high street, a GP surgery, and a genuine flow of buyers, not abandonment, to make that work. £96,000 for a flat is roughly what a lot of first-time buyers in the south of England still owe on their mortgage after a decade of payments. On Bute, that same figure buys the whole property outright, with no mortgage attached at all, on an island a short ferry ride from Glasgow rather than a long drive from anywhere. So we finally have a real answer sitting on the table. A cheap, livable Scottish home exists, and it looks nothing like the number in this video's title, which brings us to that number itself and what it actually buys. Number 1 on this list is the honest answer to this video's own headline. Yes, listings near that €19,000 price point genuinely do turn up in Scotland from time to time. The clearest documented example wasn't a hidden paradise on some forgotten island. Back in 2022, a semi-detached house in Kilmarnock hit the auction block with a guide price of £1. A £1 guide price isn't really a price at all. It's a tactic designed to pull in the widest possible pool of bidders and let the auction itself set the real number. Properties priced that way are almost always missing a roof, missing wiring, missing plumbing, sometimes missing whole walls, and they need a full structural rebuild before anyone could actually move in. Treat any figure near £19,000 or euros the same way you'd treat that £1 guide price. It's the cost of a renovation project wearing a house's clothing, not the cost of a home. That's what ties this whole list back together. Scotland really does have 43,538 empty homes and 21,606 second homes sitting mostly unused. The government's own answer to that problem, the full council tax premium on second homes introduced in April 2024, is already pulling some of them back onto the market, which is exactly why that second homes count dropped 10% in a single year. Here's who actually buys a house like this. Not the tourist looking for a weekend cottage and not someone chasing a viral thumbnail. It's retirees chasing a genuine fresh start on a fixed pension. People who've done the sums on heating and travel before they've made a single offer. It's renovators and remote workers with the cash and the time to spend 18 months on a rebuild, treating the low price as a budget for labour and materials rather than a bonus. And it's people who already know the area inside out, who've spent holidays there for years and have made peace with every trade-off covered in this list. The fuel bills, the ferry timetable, the nearest hospital being an hour or two away. None of them bought the house because of the number in a thumbnail. They bought it in spite of it, with the real number already worked out. If any of that sounds like your kind of project rather than your kind of nightmare, Scotland even runs an official route into it. The Scottish Empty Homes Partnership operates a national matchmaker scheme, connecting owners of long-term empty properties with people willing to buy and renovate them, working alongside individual councils to make it happen. It's a slower, more paperwork-heavy path than clicking buy on an auction listing, but it's also the honest one, built for people who've already decided the trade-off is worth it. Cheap to buy and cheap to live in are two completely different questions. Now you know how to tell them apart on Bute in the Western Isles, or anywhere else in Britain a headline number tries to grab your attention. So there's the real answer behind that €19,000 headline. Bute and the Western Isles back it up. Honestly, the rest show you exactly why a low price alone should worry you, not excite you. Tell me in the comments which one of these you'd actually move to and which one surprised you most. Next time we're pricing out the towns where that pension actually stretches furthest, without a single derelict roof involved.